We're all being very quiet as we're waiting for people to join the public Zoom event organised so that people can find out more about the proposals to bring forward new family homes in Beaufort Park. For people who have joined already, my name is Spencer Neal, and I'll be trying to chair this evening's conversation. It is very much intended to be a conversation. We have some screens to show people. We'll give it a couple more minutes because we are expecting a few more people. Once we get going, I'll make sure that we've got clear introductions and everybody knows what to expect over the next couple of hours. I can see that Tina's got her hand up. So if you would like to, that we have a Q&A. So if you're able to kind of comment the Q&A at this stage, and then towards the end, we'll be able to actually kind of ask people to kind of speak from the floor, as it were. So I think I'll give it one more minute. I know it's very wet out there, so maybe people are kind of caught sheltering from the rain on their way to their screens. One second. Apologies, just close the door. Right, so it's now 17:35. We said that we'd start at 5:30. So once again, my name's Spencer Neal. I am a director at Keble Brown. We're providing community engagement support for Southern Housing Group and Hill, who are putting forward proposals to develop new family homes at Beaufort Park. And I can see that Councillor Mackenzie Boyle has asked, she just has to leave at 6 o'clock and her audio's not working. So at the outset, all right, a colleague is replying. Good, right. As I said, my name's Spencer. We're going to do some introductions, and we'll be showing some screens to share with everybody that you should all be able to see, that will show our designs as far as they go. This is the first time that we presented anything in public, and so just to kind of make it clear that this is early stages. We put a lot of thought into the work that's been done so far, but obviously we're very keen to hear back from the public and the wider community, just to make sure that we can get as good a proposal for submission as we possibly can. It's important that the homes are desirable, and of course that the whole development is sustainable. So before we start showing screens, I would just like to ask my colleagues on the panel to introduce themselves. And in, depending on what you're looking at, I'm going to start first of all with Jeremy Barkway from Southern Housing Group.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Barkway from Southern Housing Group. I'm just going to start the proceedings with a little bit of information about us. So, as you can see from the screen, you've got myself and James Price from Southern, and then our consultant team that Spencer will come on to introduce in a minute. Just very briefly to say the Southern Housing Group are the applicant for the planning and the purchaser of the site. We're a housing association, which makes us a bit of a different organisation compared to other house builders. In particular, we're regulated by the government organisation. We own 28,000 properties, so property is very much our business. We're professional property managers. That's 28,000 throughout London and the south of England. We build 300 properties every year on average. We provide housing of all tenures, so that includes rented tenure, shared ownership and open market sale. In Bracknell, we have property stock of 578 properties and also concentrations in neighbouring areas. We work with developers and contractors to help us provide our housing, and in this case we've partnered with Hill and they'll introduce themselves in a minute. As I said, we're different from a house builder in that we take a long-term ownership in our developments. We therefore have a vested interest in the ongoing property condition and the neighbourhood, the estate management, and also the community is supported, and we have teams within the organisation that are resourced to facilitate that process. So this site is really exceptional from our point of view. It's an opportunity, quite a rare opportunity these days, to provide family-sized accommodation in a fantastic environment, and one where we know we'll be able to offer a great quality of life to future residents. I'll stop there.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy. So if I could now ask Seth Maynard just to introduce himself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Seth Maynard from Hill. Hill is a sort of house builder that works throughout sort of London, Southeast, and also in what we call the Western region in and around Bracknell. We're partnering with Southern on this incredible scheme. And so we'd be more responsible sort of for delivering it with Southern and just providing some insights into some of the homes that will be available for private sale. Like Southern, we also have a real sort of emphasis we put on quality of design across the scheme, and look forward to showing you some of the ideas we've already had. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. So if I could now ask James.
I'll step in, Spencer, and introduce myself. I know Jeremy mentioned me, but just say good evening, everyone. James Price, Senior Land Manager at Southern Housing Group. Just to echo what Jeremy and Seth have said, hopefully we'll show this evening, this is the Beaufort Park is a unique site with an amazing setting. The brief we set the architects is to utilise this setting and deliver a high quality landscape-led development that capitalises on these assets. As Jeremy said, Southern has a commitment to high quality design, which is shared by Hill, and we are looking to build something special that delivers on the site's potential. We're also looking to work, and listen to the community to help get the best development for our residents and for local members of the community. So thank you.
Thank you. Now, if I could ask Nicola just to explain who she is and why she's here. Nicola Hancock.
Thank you. I'm Nicola Hancock. I'm a director at the Environment Partnership.
So, Nicola, you're quite quiet. Is there any way that you could speak a bit louder into the microphone?
The Environment Partnership.
Oh, I think we've got a technical fault here.
Southern Housing and Hill. So we are. I'll shout a bit.
I'm sorry, Nicola. I think your connection, sort of your voice went a bit sort of spaced out for a moment there.
Apologies for that. Shall I start again?
I think so. That'd be good. I think.
I might turn my camera off. Maybe that would
Okay.
help. If I turn my camera off, it might make the audio a bit stronger. So I'm a landscape architect at the Environment Partnership, and we're providing landscape advice and arboricultural expertise to our clients, Southern Housing and
Brilliant. Thank you. Yeah. Claire Caldwell, please.
Hello there. Yeah, I'm Claire Caldwell. I'm from CSA Environmental, and we're providing ecology and biodiversity advice for this scheme. So yeah, we've been involved throughout in terms of the scheme design and what we can offer for biodiversity.
Thank you very much. Jamie Sullivan from ICNI.
Hi, yes, so I'm Jamie Sullivan. I'm a director at ICNI Projects. We're a multidisciplinary development consultancy, but my specialism is planning, and I'm managing the whole planning process for both Southern and Hill.
The technical stuff, thank you. Chris Holdup from Mode.
Yes, hello. Chris Holdup, Mode. I'm a transport planner engineer. Mode is a Berkshire-based consultancy, so we work throughout various different boroughs in Berkshire. So I know the site very well, and we've been involved in this site for 3 years and been advising Southern and Hill for the last year or so.
Brilliant, thank you. And last but not least, Wailan Ho from AHR. You're on mute, Wailan.
I was going to say exactly the same thing, last but not least. Anyway, so I'm Wailan Ho from AHR Architects, and we are the master planners and the designers of the homes, working with a fantastic and wonderful team. I'll try to keep it short. We are national, we are housing specialists, so we do a lot of very lovely schemes like this on quite a large scale, but we design houses with people in mind and thought. So yes, this is something we're really are going to put a lot of great energy and thought behind. Thanks.
Brilliant, brilliant. We look forward to seeing some of your designs over the next few screens. So you've heard briefly from my colleagues on the panel. I'm now going to ask, so you might have noticed that there are some people who've not introduced themselves. They're my colleagues who are just helping to kind of manage this event. And I'm going to ask Will if he can just share his screen. And so everybody should now be able to see the introductory screen, which just very simply sets out the details for this evening. And we will then quickly move on to the first screen. So next screen, please. So this screen clearly shows the location of the site, an aerial photograph, satellite image with a red line. And I think it might be useful just to get some of that kind of technical context to help explain this and the basics of our proposals. And so if I could ask Jamie just to say a few words to help us understand. So what's this screen showing us, Jamie?
Yeah, so thanks, Spencer. So, I mean, this screen really shows the sites in context, as it were. And I think that the key things I will point out here is that obviously you have the large Butlers Park development to the south of the site, and that's bringing forward a new primary school, community hub and local shops. So fortunately that does provide us a bit of a springboard in terms of some infrastructure being provided. And then you can see to the kind of the northeast there, the built up area of Bracknell that we're connecting up to. Do you want me to provide a bit of an intro, a sort of cover off the planning picture to provide a bit more?
I think, I mean, so I mean, we've been saying in our initial kind of social media platforms and in the leaflets that the site itself is allocated within, it's got a draft allocation. So you know, for somebody who's just come up to this, what does that actually mean?
Yeah, so I mean, if we start from the beginning, basically, the council has a statutory duty to produce a local plan to meet the housing need within the district. And within Bracknell Forest, that's around 10,000 homes up to 2036. And there's also a need for 376 affordable homes a year as well. Now, what the local plan does is it takes that need and it identifies different sites across the district to ensure that there's enough housing to meet that need over the plan period. And specific sites, as I said, will be identified across the district with different numbers attached to them.
Okay, thank you. So am I right in thinking, when this looks, obviously, we can see that the built-up area. So is this part of the green belt?
No, so it's a greenfield site that sits adjacent to the settlement boundary, but it is not a green belt site. And there is the green belt is a much more permanent spatial policy that offers a higher level of protection. This is just an undeveloped site outside of but adjoining the settlement.
And then perhaps, I don't know whether, Jeremy, you want to say anything about, how Southern's approach to how you're sort of taking advantage of the opportunity in this context. I mean, it seems to be close to amenities, but I mean, do you have anything to?
Yes, and every time we evaluate a site that we want to get involved with and invest in, we look at all the neighbouring infrastructure and facilities, and want to understand that a community is going to thrive in this location. And in our assessment, this site meets all our criteria. That takes into account that as a developer, we will be making financial contributions to strengthening the infrastructure through the Section 106 contribution system, which we can explain in more detail perhaps later.
Yeah. Okay. So I think maybe we can move on to the next slide, which gets into a bit more detail. Wylan,
sure.
Can you just talk us through this?
Yes, of course. Yeah. So this is just a little diagram, and this diagram represents the overall site boundary. You can probably just pick out from the diagram the words 9 Mile Ride at the bottom. So that is one of the bounding roads. And then to the right is South Road, which runs north-south. So those are the most, and then at the top is West Road as well. So those are the three main roads that constrain the site. But to the south, what you have is a very strong tree boundary of the commercial timber plantation. And there's a little image on the side of that, which gives you the sense that this is a country road, the sense of a country road. And this is really important for us because this is something we feel that we should permeate through the entire development as a design process to keep it as a landscape-led, natural feel, the sense that there is no development in fact, or nearby.
So people driving down 9 Mile Ride won't actually see any difference.
Exactly. So the sense, what they see there on the left-hand side is pretty much what they will see in the future. The only difference, however, is the main access, and that's where the roundabout is to the west of 9 Mile Road, and that will be the entry gate, and that's where you see that little bit of white gap along the 50-meter buffer. So once you go beyond that, you have this dashed line. This is a natural separation in the developable oval site. This is because there is an oil pipeline that runs underneath. And this also, what we feel is important is to use this attribute as a pedestrian link or a cycle link, so nothing actually gets built on it. But north of this site is the pink area. That is the developable area, and it represents 7 hectares out of 31 overall. So it's fairly marginal. It's 22.5% entire site.
I know that I'm kind of jumping ahead, but I've just seen that one of the audience, if you like, has asked a very simple question: how many houses, how many homes are we intending to put on that developable area?
Sure. So on that.
Sorry, Waylon. Can I?
No, go for it, James. Please.
It might be better for Jamie to add a bit more background on the planning history of the site. So Jamie, I don't know if you want to step in.
Yeah. I should just that's probably a good point to highlight in terms of the number of dwellings on the site. It would be 226, and that's specified within the local plan allocation that I was speaking about as well. I think it's probably worth highlighting at this stage as well that there are some other requirements within that allocation that respond to some of the constraints that are kind of set out here. So that allocation requires us to provide significant amounts of green infrastructure and public open space, and you can start to see on this plan the level of green space that we're putting into the proposal to meet those requirements, and that includes this large suitable alternative natural green space located to the north here, which is a very large open area of natural open space to provide a resource for local people in the area. I know that Claire will be talking on that a little bit more. We're also required to provide that buffer located to the south of the site, south of the pipeline there, and also a number of different kind of pedestrian and cycle routes through the scheme as well is required.
Mm-hmm. Now that makes a lot of sense, and I think we're going to be talking about buffers quite a lot. And just to be clear, you've talked about the sustainable alternative natural green space. Have I got that right? That's the SANG that I know Claire spends a lot of time explaining to people.
Yes, exactly. I don't know if you want Claire to kind of pick that one up in a bit more detail, but...
Well, I know that we've got a screen coming up a bit later, but if anybody's got any questions about the environment or the biodiversity or any of the sustainability issues, please just do type out your questions and we'll make sure we get to them. Great. So do you want to go to the next slide, please, Will? So this is where we start talking about the connections and the permeability of the developed area and its links with the wider community. And we've had one, Janet's asked the question, which essentially is that we've made reference to local amenity, Bucklers Park, which I think is the Cala Homes development. But the query is those are not actually planned. And I'm wondering, if anybody is able to kind of just answer, what will people on our development be able to do for local amenities?
So sorry, what was the query there?
So the query is that we've made reference to amenities at Bucklers Park, but there's nothing actually planned, and I'm not sure what your plan is or your thinking is. As to how to make sure that people living at Beaufort Park are able to access amenities, which I think is a good question.
Yeah, no, very good question. So one of the things we're talking about at the end is timescales, and obviously the Bucklers Park development is quite a long way ahead of us already, and a lot of that development is coming out of the ground already, and the infrastructure to come alongside it is also on its way. So by the time that we are, if planning permission is granted, by the time we're actually building out these houses and people start living in it, Bucklers Park will be substantially complete. I would also add that there is also some pretty decent infrastructure in the local area already in terms of bus routes going in there. There's a secondary school nearby as well, and direct routes into Bracknell in addition to that as well. So I can see the point that is being made, but I think I would stress you probably need to look at this several years into the future in terms of what the surrounding area will be like.
Yeah, no, okay, I think that makes sense, and hence the importance of the connectedness and the cycle routes and so on, which I know that the ward councillors have been very keen to impress upon us. So we are starting to get some good questions coming through, interestingly, on SANG as well. And just to add that there is a project website, Beaufort Park Bracknell.co.uk, which you, I'm sure, have come across. There's a very detailed kind of briefing document to help explain what SANG is, and if you like, you know, what it's good for, what are the advantages of having SANG in your neighbourhood. But we will come on it a bit later on. The management of the SANG, I don't know if we can answer that one quickly. Has the management been agreed yet, Claire?
We will be producing a detailed management plan for the SANG area as part of the application, and we have met with Bracknell Forest Council and Natural England to discuss the management of the SANG area, what that will entail and how that will be delivered. It is envisaged that Bracknell Forest Council would take on the management of the SANG with contributions provided by the applicant, but we're still in discussions about that at the moment. So that's how things are evolving. Yeah.
And obviously there are, you know, other providers of management are available, I think is what they would say on the BBC. Thank you, Claire. So should we haven't really talked about SUDs. I know there's another element of kind of the landscape and how that helps to like define and refine the development. So do you want to pick up on that, Wylan, just on how you're looking at your master plan?
Yeah, sure. I mean, again, how we're dealing with flood mitigation, well, water drainage, rainwater drainage, etc. Instead of it just, you know, going underground or disappearing and no one gets to see, and it disappears. We are using natural features and attenuation basins and swales to create natural features to fit in with the landscape, and this then gets integrated and weaved in with the overall development itself. So what you see in that little diagram, that little blue slither, to that and to the south where the entrance is, the main gateway. So if you go further south, there exactly, this little wedge, that cheese-shaped area. So that becomes a basin where water will attenuate and flow into, but then it will be mixed in with the landscape as well. So that's something I believe Nicola is working towards as well. So, and with the play areas, so it becomes a lovely, you know, meadow grass and usable space, and an outlook, visual amenity for everybody who arrives there when driving or walking or cycling into the development itself.
Okay, thank you. Should we flick through to the next slide? Because I think this helps to give that sense of the way that people will move through the site, and the importance that, I mean, I think is this what Chris, would you call this hierarchy? Is there a method to this?
Yeah, you could, Spencer. It's a good way of putting it. I mean, I could talk a little bit about the kind of the overarching transport strategy. I mean, some of it's been covered already, so I'll try not to go over old ground. But you know, fundamentally, the site, for all the reasons stated before, is in a great location to capitalise upon pre-existing walking, cycling, and public transport infrastructure, including bus stops that you can see there on the slide. So, you know, as a transport planner, we'd always look at a site like that and go, how can we work with that and maximise those sustainable travel opportunities, which is a policy.
We've had a question, Chris, somebody asking, you know, so is there only one way in and out of the site, and that's off 9 Mile Ride? Can you just help answer that, please?
Of course, yeah. I mean, it kind of looks a bit like that on that figure, but really, it's all about permeability. So actually, that figure showing pedestrian and cycle routes in the most part. So most of the blue and the orange, the dashed lines, are entirely walking cycling routes, which is making up a network that can permeate between 9 Mile Ride and South Road. So, of course, people own cars, and we have to have a vehicle access as well. So I think Waylon mentioned earlier that the principal access is by an upgrade of the roundabout. So for those who aren't aware, that roundabout has been there for quite a few years, actually, serving the what's known as a TRL development. It had done for a number of years, and Beaufort Park will partly rely on that. And what we're proposing is a pretty significant upgrade, actually, to that roundabout that will maintain the capacity on the roundabout whilst providing vehicle access to most of the houses on our site there. So, and a really key point actually on that, maintaining the free flow of traffic on 9 Mile Ride. We've worked very closely with the officers at Bracknell and their highways team, and roundabout as an option, and it's just mostly led by them, actually, their views that is the best thing to do, to take access into there. What we will have as well, so the arrow onto South Road you see there, we're still working through the detail of that. That will principally be a pedestrian and cycle route, but there's also advantages to having a modest number of houses that would go onto there for vehicles as well, and that might take the pressure a little bit off the roundabout and just separate the site out a little bit. So we're still going through the detail on that. Would it help, Spencer, if I explain the parking a little bit?
Yes, please. Yes.
Okay. So there's a table there, top left of the slide. Those are the number of parking spaces per house size, and that follows exactly the council's adopted parking standards, again, their own policy, and we are providing exactly in line with that, which will give 518 dedicated parking spaces per house. That'll all be on plot, driveway, or indeed a garage, a kind of mixture of the two. And then, quite importantly, actually, we're providing 42 visitor parking spaces as well. Over and above that, that's about equivalent to 1 space in every 5 houses. Again, Bracknell's own policy, that one, and that'll be really key in ensuring that we don't congest the streets within the site.
And I think one of the questions that came through earlier via the website was about future-proofing, because obviously, and I think people's transport needs and their mode, I think is the technical term, whether they go by bus or bike or whatever. That means there's a lot of change going on. How is what we're proposing going to take account of those kind of future innovations, electric vehicles and the like?
It's a, truth is, it's a pretty exciting time to be a transport planner, because there's quite a movement going on, and we want to be alive to that, react accordingly. There's only so much we can predict at a planning application stage, and we're trying to do the best that we can here. But the ways that you can be proactive about it are things like you can see there. So a really high quality pedestrian and cycling network, really making an effort to connect to the bus stop. So that blue arrow, that would be an adopted pedestrian cycle route, and we identified that almost right at the beginning of the project as a team, as a way of maximising the ability to get to buses. And those are kind of specific things that we can do. There will be a green travel plan that will accompany the planning application, and that is a real opportunity to allow for that future proofing that you mentioned, things like electric vehicle charging. That can all be monitored, and it's not like you get a planning permission and then that's job done for transport, not at all. And exactly while we'll be submitting a green travel plan, that will give Southern and Hill the opportunity to keep a track of what's going on, what actually happens on the ground when people move in, get to know their residents, including providing a welcome pack, for example, asking their opinions about what's it actually like to live here.
I was going to say that's actually, it sounds like a good chance for us to ask for ideas and suggestions and potential innovations from people who already live in the area, who might have already thought of some ways to help kind of mitigate some of the challenges that, you know, congestion and car use and all the rest of it. There are increasingly you know, alternatives, as it were, that are being inspired by local communities. So we'll put that out there on our Facebook and ask for ideas. Now that's really useful. One other question, and we touched on this earlier, Chris, in our discussion, so I don't know if it's for you to answer or maybe Jamie, but there is some concern that our residents would be in some way using West Road, which is the road that runs kind of, if we flick back a couple of screens, Will, yeah, so it runs, yeah, there's West Road. So is there a risk that our residents would be, you know, assuming that we get the go ahead and it all builds out and everybody moves in, would residents be using West Road as a rat run?
Happy to answer that one, Spencer, that would help. You know, that we've been, you know, alive to that one actually all along, and you know, really it's one really good reason why the high quality roundabout access in the way that we're showing it would mean that you don't expect that to happen. What I would say is that a comprehensive transport assessment is being submitted with a planning application. We'll be making use of the council's own strategic traffic model, and if there are things that you don't quite expect to happen, that'll get picked up, and we'll be looking at that and making sure that there aren't any undue impacts as a result. But we're not expecting that to happen. You provide a roundabout, as you can see it there, and the ability to get off South Road and straight down to 9 Mile Ride. It's about getting onto 9 Mile Ride and keeping the free flow of traffic along there, not having rat running along places.
Will you be doing any kind of movement assessments, traffic assessments as the project progresses? Because I think people are can see from the questions coming through, you know, Janet and an anonymous attendee, but a number of people have been asking, you know, what about the increased traffic? And I suppose that the obvious answer is, well, we'd need to know how much we expect the traffic to increase by. Do we have an answer on that yet, or is that coming later?
Yeah, I absolutely got an answer on that. Yeah, I mean, you know, not a day goes by at the moment where we're not, you know, looking at that at the moment, and we're working very closely actually with, you know, not just that, but a number of things with the highways team at Bracknell about how we assess that, because it is really, really important. You know, it's important for this planning application, it's important for their local plan, which is why they have a strategic traffic model. And they've had that for a number of years and continue to use it, including for the local plan, including for this site. We are working with them to ensure that we align with their forecast of what they expect to happen on the network. How a site here with accesses that you can see there with 226 houses on it, how would that affect the operation of the network? That's what their model does, and we're working very closely with them to use that information, plus do our own assessments on top of that. All of that will go into a comprehensive transport assessment, and we'd encourage anyone who's interested in any of that to have a good read of it when it goes in. It'll be very detailed. We'll pick up on all of those potential concerns that people might have about increased congestion. We will be generating more traffic. It's extra housing, and that, you know, that is what happens, isn't it? But it's about checking, making sure nothing untoward happens, and you know, if we need to mitigate, we'll be doing that as well.
Okay, no, I appreciate that. Perhaps, you know, there's another query. I mean, people are very interested in the SANG, and we will come on that later, including the routes through to the SANG and from our SANG and safeguarded land through to neighbouring SANGs. But if we just move on to the next slide. Thank you, Chris. That's really helpful. I think we come again more to the sort of the creative design element, which I think I can ask Wyland to just talk us through a bit.
Sure.
You've got a bit more definition here in terms of your thinking on how the house types.
Yes. So, well, first of all, I think it's important just to say this is an indicative master plan, and this is how we've distributed the family homes here. The family homes range from 2 beds to 4 beds. There is a very small slither of apartments, but these are 2-story and they are walk up. So each apartment has their own private entrance, and you can see that in the purple exactly there. But just to lead you through the master plan, just to give you a sort of sense of what we're trying to achieve, if we go from the roundabout with the arrow, there you go. Then as you go up and you pass the plantation, and then you take a right bend, and this bend, you see either side of it is an expanse of open space, it's the attenuation basin and play areas. So it creates a very attractive
We had a question, Wyland, just on that.
Yeah.
Those attenuation ponds there.
Sure.
So how does that contribute to the management of water, and what's the risk of there being increased flooding, for example, at the Badgerwood Park residential park area?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know if our civils are here. However, the way that we've been discussing this, also with Nicola as well, our landscape architect, is that this is one of the lowest parts of the site. And so what it does is that water flows into this space, and it never really, when it rains heavily, then this is the bit that we have allowed for it to rise up. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, by any token, it will mostly remain dry. So it's not really, we did have at one point, we called it the wetland, but it's, you know, having seen that the existing fauna and flora there weren't really any plants that gave us the sense that this was a wetland at all. And so ultimately we believe that this part of the site, though it's the lowest and the best place for it to attenuate water, it's also, it probably will never flood to that degree that everyone's thinking that it would, even with the development of 2,226 homes.
So essentially, while there was more detail to show at a later stage, we're designing out the risk of flooding through engineering and
that's correct. And with the swales and other such strategies that we're proposing. Yes. I don't know if Nicola, is there anything you want to feed in onto that? Because we are working very closely with Stefan, our civils.
Yes, I think one of the things to say is that the way of managing the water will be to integrate it with the landscape, so that although we've got an attenuation quite close to the site entrance, there'll also be ways of managing the water throughout the development. And so the soft areas of the landscape will infiltrate naturally and will hold water and slow it down. And then the attenuation basins are sort of at the end of that chain. So that's the area which will have a varying water level, as you've said, well, and most of the time would be dry. But at times of heavier rainfall, then that they will fill up, and the size of them will be calculated based on the volume of water that they need to store safely to avoid any flooding. So that's where we're working carefully with the hydrological engineers to make sure that the capacity of those depressions, if you like, they're sort of just low-lying areas, that they've got sufficient capacity to avoid any flooding, either on this site or on any neighbouring land.
That's correct.
Is my microphone working okay? Can I just check?
Perfect.
Yeah, we can. Okay. Sorry.
Thank you.
I was yes, I was just thinking, how do you take account of things like climate change?
Well, those extra levels of volume that you need to plan for are all taken into consideration with the calculations. So it's no good calculating what we need for now, for this year. We need to forecast it and plan ahead, so that as climate change comes forward and as it's already here, we know it is, there's evidence of it on a daily basis, but those calculations are built into the design of these areas. So that's why we have an expert who looks at and understands what the implications will be of climate change and how we need to accommodate it in the future. So it's not designed for today, it's designed for the future.
So one of our guests this evening has been pointing out that there's already a problem with debris kind of building up on 9 Mile Ride, and that then blocks drains and causes localized flooding on the roads. Is it too much to ask that what we're proposing here could have some mitigating impact on existing problems, or is that how does that work?
Well, this site will be the sustainable drainage on this site is designed to deal with the development itself. The highways drainage is slightly independent from this, so I guess it's something that can be discussed with the council as to whether there's any opportunity to perhaps incorporate improvements off site.
For Seth, as responsible for delivery, but you know, I think one of the concerns is also that during construction and site enabling works, that you know, can you do anything with contractors to stop them from clogging up local drains?
I mean, yes, we'd be sort of looking to be a good neighbour during the construction process. We'd be looking, I mean, that's something that I'm sorry to hear has happened from the TOL site. It's something we'd be looking to eliminate entirely, if not minimise completely. I mean, it's being a good, as I say, being a good neighbour during the construction sort of process is really important to us, and it's something that we do across a number of our sites. And I see that even for the construction period, one of the questions in the Q&A is about the sort of sensitive boundary to the cemetery. I mean, as you can all expect, we can't promise that there will be no noise during the sort of construction and delivery of all these homes, but we have a number of sort of tried and tested methods that we use to sort of minimize noise disruption in particular, as well as others during the sort of construction period. A specific example being, for example, air compressors, which can be very noisy, sort of using silencers for them that really help to bring down the noise. And then also doing things like having very deliberate plans to avoid having deliveries at peak times and other things like that. So it's something we're very live to from a delivery perspective. I
know some planning authorities require a very kind of comprehensive kind of management plan through demolition and enabling and into construction. I don't know if that's something that Bracknell Forest require as well, but I would imagine that you would be looking to produce one anyway, so that local community can see what your standards are and how you intend to enforce them. Is that right?
In that sense, I mean, I'd sort of also defer a bit to Jamie, but we would be looking to sort of put in place the most robust plan that, as I say, sort of we'd act as a good neighbour. We want everyone to sort of have peace of mind. We want our project to run sort of smoothly. And part of that is not creating sort of undue interruption.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
no, I think that's helped answer that. I know Councillor Wade's asked if we're planning to put a roundabout at the end of South Road. We haven't really kind of shown quite how that's configured.
I don't think we're putting Chris, we're not putting a roundabout at that corner junction. I don't believe.
No, it wouldn't. I could understand, but no, that isn't a priority junction. It will be, yeah.
And sorry to just jump in, Spencer. I think Jamie was wanting to say something after my piece.
Sorry, Jamie.
I was just going to say that a construction management plan will be a condition of any planning permission, and before we can start any construction works on the site, then something will have to be agreed that's acceptable to the council to avoid those types of disturbances that were set out there. So you've got the kind of the double whammy of a responsible developer here who's very committed to those principles, and the regulatory teeth of the planning permission being able to control that as well.
No, that's appreciated. Thank you,
Spencer. Sorry to jump in, Spencer. Can I just add a point about the flood risk? We've been on site monitoring flood levels for the last year in the developable area, and the evidence has shown, you know, what you see in front of you there as the developable area is at low risk of flooding. So it's not a high risk area for flooding.
Understood. We've got quite a few questions about our relationship with the kind of interaction between ourselves and the Taylor Wimpey site. But before we get to that, and it kind of goes back to that the sort of planning conditions, I guess, the obligations that we would agree. So Bucklers Park has agreed, it would seem, not to sell any homes until the SANG is completed. What are our thoughts on that?
Shall I jump in there, Spencer?
Yes, Claire. Yeah.
It is a typical requirement of SANG mitigation to ensure that the SANG is delivered prior to occupation. So I don't think it's so much about sales of homes, it's about occupation of homes. And the idea is that the mitigation is in place, ready for new residents to use before anybody moves in. So it's an impact avoidance measure to encourage people to use the SANG provision and not to divert to the SPA, the special protected area, for their sort of informal amenity uses of dog walking, which research has shown has had, you know, a detrimental effect on disturbance of ground nesting birds. So it will be a pre-occupation condition, I would have thought, of the planning consent.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Hopefully that answers Carol's query. As I said, we had quite a few people asking about whether or not there be links through or walks through the Taylor Wimpey site. And I know that we've got people from Taylor Wimpey in the audience. I just thought, you know, so I think is that Jamie again that's able to answer that? Or
in terms of links with the Taylor Wimpey site, yes. So I mean, you can see here that we've got the most up-to-date Taylor Wimpey layout. So the process that Taylor Wimpey's scheme is going through is that they already have outline consent, and now they're applying for reserve matters, which is where these detailed elements of design are agreed with the council. So we've been using the most up-to-date plans there to provide important context in terms of our own design. At the moment, the approach is that there will be the ability to move between the two sites. There'll be no kind of hard barriers between the two. Taylor Wimpey will obviously be able to use the SANG and the different provisions within our site. And we've kind of designed the scheme to ensure that it works in development terms and in terms of the ability for residents of the Taylor Wimpey scheme to use any green space or SANG within our site as well.
Thank you. I can see that, and again,
but sorry. One important point there, I should say, is that both sites have their own vehicular access. So there's no shared vehicular access between the two. Both kind of looks after themselves in that regard. It's more the kind of the absence of barriers between the two was what I was trying to point out there.
Yeah, I understood. And then so vehicular, so that doesn't necessarily prevent bicycles or pedestrians. How free will they be able to walk around? And what kind of impact will that have, for example, on Beaufort Park?
Well, yeah, you're quite right there. There is the access, separate access is in terms of cars. So pedestrians will be able to move around. You know, there's no gated communities here. These are two developments which can coexist very comfortably. In terms of Badgerwood Park and any impact on that scheme, from the Taylor Wimpey perspective, I think the idea is to come out on South Road and then go down south from there, because there's limited desire to move to go to the north from the site, and equally from our site, all the facilities and all of the key transport links are all to the south and then out to the east and west from there. And then I guess in terms of our pedestrian and cycle linkages, Chris might be able to provide a bit more detail on that. But again, the idea here is that these are all to the south of the site and are very much east to west. We're not kind of encouraging people to travel in a northeast direction, and nor would I expect them to, given the layout of the scheme and given where you would expect people to travel from the site as well.
I see. And you know, and I am right in thinking that Taylor Wimpey has its own vehicular access road, and that is entirely separate to the access route into Beaufort Park from South Road that would be coming into our development. Which, yeah, and I can see that you're pointing at that now, and that makes sense to me, and hopefully that has helped answer the question.
Exactly. Yeah. I think the only other point I would make as well is that, you know, both schemes will be expected by the council to deliver sufficient play space and the likes. It's not like there's any deficiency that requires a kind of interdependence on the two. The only area where we're almost providing a bit of support, as it were, is the SANG itself and the ability for Taylor Wimpey residents to use that SANG. But, you know, I don't want people to get the idea that, you know, either development is deficient or in any way, or that we're kind of codependent. You know, there's just ability for these two sites to sit very comfortably alongside each other.
There's a slide coming up which shows the sort of pedestrian routes in the SANG, doesn't it? I believe so.
Yes, no, exactly. And we're going to be moving more onto the next slide, please, Will. So this explains a little bit about the character areas, and I think perhaps we can come back to that, because I think we need to kind of move on to SANG, and so we just jump on ahead, Will. So I think this helps kind of answer a lot of the queries that we've been getting. So slightly ahead of the plan, Claire, if you'd like to jump in and just talk us through what's safeguarded land, what's SANG, and I think a question that's coming up from a number of people in the audience is, you know, what kind of protection, if you like, will the residents of what is now referred to as Badgerwood Park, Badgerwood Resident Park, I think is what it's called.
Okay, so just picking up first on the point about the Taylor Wimpey development, that development has its own agreement in terms of SANG provision off-site. So yes, Taylor Wimpey residents will benefit from this new SANG being adjacent, but it's not required to deliver their site. We will be delivering about 5.5 hectares of SANG, which is an over provision for the 226 units proposed as part of the Southern Housing application. And you know, the SANG proposals are still a bit of a work in process. We're working with the council and Natural England to agree the SANG proposals. But on this slide, you can see the location of the SANG land there to the north, and you can see some blue arrows, which are sort of indicative pedestrian accesses into the SANG. So there'll be a direct access there, that arrow on the eastern side of the slide, on the east, yeah. So they will be a direct access from the eastern side of the development into that woodland parcel that's retained broadleaf woodland within the northern part of the SANG. And there will also be some access points from the eastern side of the development via this orange hatch area, which is identified as safeguarded land, and that is land safeguarded for biodiversity and wildlife. So in terms of the SANG, we have identified the parts of the site that are least sensitive to disturbance from recreation, and that's why the SANG is in that location. But we want to provide permeability from the development area into the Sang, and that will be provided by some walking routes through this safeguarded area. Now, that safeguarded area at the moment comprises some remnant heath, which will be restored as part of the management plan for this northern part of the site, and some woodland areas. So the most likely route through there will be, a very defined path, whether that be a boardwalk or a sealed path, to make it very clear to users of the Sang that it's a through route from the development to the open Sang area, where they'll then be able to have dogs off leads, etc., and fulfil that sort of Sang requirement. So in terms of sort of buffer to the Badger Park development to the west, there won't be public access immediately adjacent to the Badger Park development. That orange area there won't be public access, won't be part of the amenity Sang provision. It will be managed in a for biodiversity and for biodiversity net gain. So hopefully that starts to allay some of the fears that there will be a bit of a buffer. We are considering whether we provide parking specifically for the Sang, so that's in addition to any visitor spaces that we provided for the development, and there's an indicative parking location shown on that plan. Technically, we don't have to provide any parking spaces for the Sang, because all the units will be within 400 metres of an access to the Sang, a pedestrian access. But we know from the popularity of the Beaufort Park Sang, and I think someone's brought that up in the comments, that other local residents will want to use this Sang because it will be a fantastic resource for the local community. So we will be providing some parking, and we'll be agreeing that with Bracknell Council, based on their experiences elsewhere.
I think that answers quite a few of the questions that are coming through. And just to say that any questions that we don't get to answer specifically this evening, if there's any questions that we simply haven't got to the answers yet, so for example, there is still more work to be done in terms of getting data and doing surveys and analysis and stuff, obviously we'll be making that public later on, and then questions that we get tonight that we do have the answers for but we don't have time for, we'll be posting all of those on the website. This evening, as you can see, is being recorded, and so we are making sure that we don't miss anything, and anybody who thinks their question's not being answered, rest assured it will be. This is the beginning of what we know is going to be a very important conversation that we have with your representatives, individuals, and the wider community. It's important just to kind of make that as we reach the kind of 6:30 stage, and already I can see that there's a lot of questions that we've still got to get to. So I just wanted to reassure everybody in the audience. Thanks, Claire, because that's really useful. We've had a question about the length of the circular walk and whether or not we're compliant with Natural England's kind of criteria.
Yeah, so on this site, we are taking the super Sang approach, is how Natural England phrase it. So as well as the Sang provision on site, so we are providing an over provision in terms of hectarage, but we will be providing longer walk lengths by linking through to the other local Sangs. So those red dotted lines are leading through the development and principally down to the new greenway that's going to be along the gas pipeline. That's it, where the cursor is. We'll be linking through then to the Great Holland Sang and to the Beaufort Park Sang, which is a very large Sang to the south. And Natural England and the council have agreed that principle. They're very keen to link up the local Sang network. So yes, we are compliant in terms of a agreed super Sang approach to delivery.
No, that sounds as though we are being encouraged to walk more.
Absolutely.
Who'd have thought? And I just so somebody was saying that they thought that we'd kind of slightly jumped ahead in terms of suggesting proposing 226 homes. and that they were under the impression that we were only allowed to apply for 68. And I have actually just typed a quick answer just to say that I believe the Taylor Wimpey development is, I think, about 68 homes. And that, as we said at the beginning of this evening's session, our allocation, and I think Jamie made that very clear, our allocation was for 226 homes, which is in the draft local plan. Is that right, Jamie?
Yeah, that's correct. So the Taylor Wimpey scheme has got its outline consent for up to, I think, 68 units, and then the reserve matters has to fit within that, which is what's going through the process now. We're coming in with a whole new, fresh application for different lands. That's the allocated land to the south around it that we've that you'll see just on the plan there, the sort of the dark grey, dark green area. That's the allocated area that we're submitting the application for. That's what's got the draft allocation for 226 homes.
Yeah, no, thank you. As I said at the beginning, Jamie, you are going to be answering a lot of the technical planning questions. It is quite, as is often reported in the general media, planning can seem quite a dark art. And we had some questions coming through via email and over the internet over the last week or so. One of them was about fire safety, and I suppose that's a very sensible question. We're more used to that question in terms of high-rise developments these days in the media, but obviously, again, it's a climate change issue. What efforts will we make to help reduce fire risk across our development? Yeah, who's going to help me on that?
Well, I think I can probably come in on that a little bit. In terms of the house designs, I mean, they all need to meet approved building regulations, approved document Part B, but also these are houses of 2 and 3 stories at the very most. So like you say, Spencer, these aren't high rises. The other thing is that we tend to choose for the houses more the materials that we're choosing, like brick, clay roof tiles, etc. The net of materials that are non-combustible in the first place. And also there is the second aspect of access to the houses furthest away from a fire appliance. And so, Chris, this is something we've been working on in terms of the tracking, who's our transport consultant. And so we know that by looking at the roads, the cul-de-sacs, where we do have dead ends, that we know that our fire appliance can actually get to the end house, for example, and meet the distance requirements, etc.
But I mean, and the fact that we do have a lot of both the remaining timber, the commercial timber plantation that's on the site. Does that pose additional risks, and are there any measures that we'd be looking to impose, or is that something the local authority would have to decide on? Seth, perhaps you?
Yeah, I think I can jump in a bit here. It's less so necessarily about a management strategy for the trees, but one of the requirements of us there are sort of minimum offsets that we have to do for the trees to the roads and other things like that, to not only for a fire risk point of view, but also just for the risk of trees falling. So these are all things that are in our mind, and as well as sort of Wayland touched on, fully tracking the routes that fire appliances can take through the site. From an actual individual design standpoint, I mean, I know sort of Wayland's spoken to some of the materials being used being sort of particularly good to mitigate fire risk. That's something that is sort of incorporated into all of the sort of specification of the elements we use for homes. And yeah, I just think it's a very key part of sort of the collaboration that us sort of Southern and way than AHR have is sort of bearing in mind all these like key risks for these homes we're building, because as was sort of highlighted at the start, Southern is going to retain a key interest in this site going forward. It's very much in everyone's interest to build the best quality scheme as possible, and a big part of that is sort of dealing with fire risk as far as possible.
And I guess
thanks, Seth. That's, yeah. So yeah, that's, you know, that's very useful, Seth. Thank you. And obviously, as a housing association, you know, building safety and fire safety is of the utmost importance to us, and that will be reflected in our design and in our work with Hill as contractor.
And I'm guessing that just looking at some of the questions coming through, you know, you know, it seems we're a long way away from talking about things like antisocial behaviour, because you wouldn't normally expect to talk about that until you've got people, you know, living in the development. But I'm guessing that Southern Housing Group is very familiar with making sure that communities are well behaved, in that they're not infringing on other people's rights to sort of privacy and quiet life and all the rest of it. Jeremy, I think that's one for you.
Thought it was. Yeah, that's definitely the case, and we with residents form panels to oversee the delivery of services to large-scale developments such as this, and that monitoring process will, you know, boil down to people walking around the site, and as I say, it won't just be staff from Southern Housing. It'll involve residents from the estate, and this is a model we use across our stock, and it's a really effective way of managing that sort of problem.
Help integrate that kind of village feel, I guess, in some ways. That
yeah.
People like having in you know, outside of big cities. People quite like kind of village lifestyle of a close, well-knit community.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah. The jumping about, but we've got reducing time, and we're going back to the issue of climate change and carbon emissions and so on. Jeremy has asked about our energy and carbon footprint, and quite how we're managing that downwards. And do we have any commitments in terms of things like zero carbon or net zero carbon? You know, where do we stand on that? Is that something for Nicola or Seth?
I can just sort of touch on some of the kind of more concrete aspects of the design that are going to lead to that.
Concrete being a very good pun there, Seth.
Probably not the best choice of words, but nonetheless. So I think I saw in the question in the Q&A section about gas. Yes, this would be a scheme with no gas whatsoever. We're currently sort of looking at an air source heat pump strategy across the site, so that it can all run off electric, and that's all sort of being factored into our sort of requirements that we're designing for substations and things of that nature. I think in terms of sort of other steps, I know that, let me just,
I can come in
just pause. Yeah, I can come back.
Yeah, I mean, I could just say a little about the house designs. We take very much a fabric first approach, and what that means is
let me get Will to just jump back.
Oh, sorry then. Yeah, sorry.
A few slides, just so we can look at some of the sort of sketches that we've got in terms of house designs. So here, I think, as it says, it's an example, and I think this is looking at the arrow
entrance.
Yeah.
So this is like this is the entrance gateway to the main avenue leading up to the heathland and grasslands beyond, and these are the gateway houses that form that entrance. So provides a very strong sense of arrival as you lead through the development. Now, again, what we have spoken about is it being landscape led, and this is very much a sort of green link to the Sang itself. So some of the proposals that we are developing are like the swale, a tree boulevard, and houses set very far back, but they're also within the proximity to have eyes on the street, passive surveillance, and so there's a sense of neighborliness at the end of the day. Now, the houses themselves are designed so that they are more, there's a fabric first, and as I mentioned earlier, and what that means is that they're designed with quite a thick wall and a sense of airtightness so that we can deal with the internal comfort. That's probably the key word, is internal comfort. So we can actually control the temperature inside. So if it's very hot outside, it doesn't matter, because we know we can use them. They have the MVHR unit, it's mechanical ventilation and heat recovery unit, to deal with the air internally. And that is using a air source heat pump technology, renewable technologies, etc., without the use of gas. So we are approaching the whole idea of sort of, you know, carbon neutral, but I don't think these are houses that are to that level, but they are still very, very, very high and way above what building regulations expect us to do. Don't know if there's anything else you'd like to add.
No, I think I think that's a good start. I think people will be curious as we go along over the next weeks and months to see how how we're going to translate our environmental ambitions into something that is truly sustainable. I think the summer's news is making everybody very much alive to climate change, and we've got COP26 coming up. So yes. I suspect that we'll get more questions on this over the coming weeks.
I think as the design develops, we can share more information on the heating strategy and the effects that has on carbon performance, etc.
Yes, yes.
I think that would be useful to make sure that we've got a bit more substance to that for the next presentation, which we're planning in early September. If we, I think we might have missed out a couple of slides. Do you want to just check? So yes, I jumped in to talk about the SANG, but Wylan, could you just explain what that page?
Yes, so this is just our one way of sort of looking at the developable area, the master plan, and then separating it into key character areas that form the overall master plan. So we've highlighted very much the entrance, the main gateway that leads to the SANG, and so we've called that the Heathland Gateway, actually. And so there is a particular character of those homes that form that edge and the route through. The second one is the East Common in purple, and that is the route through to the East Common. And this is a nice linear path that runs north-south, and there's houses that literally form around it. And I think this is a very, very attractive space for that part of the character area. The Pine Walk is literally the houses, mostly to the south and the east, which form the buffer between the plantation, and a lot of those trees were, I believe, pines. So hence Pine Walk. And then in the middle, these little mews courts in the red, those form the garden streets, and these are the more tight-knit community type smaller homes. When I say small, they're two-bedders. They all meet minimum space standards, etc., national standards, but they are the two beds, right, as opposed to the 3-4 bedroom homes, which form more around the edge. So, and the little dots, the circles, are the sort of key character of points where we started to work up some of the views, some of the vistas, etc. And so one of the visions that we have is that second slide that is after this one. So we go to so that is the entry gates. So the circle represents.
And then if we jump to the next slide, I think gives us another view.
Yes. And this is that linear park, sort of green. And I mean, one thing we haven't really spoken about is that the park itself is designed so that it doesn't allow through traffic. The park itself stops up any cars that go through.
I think actually one of the questions that we've had is, will people be able to drive through from one access point to the other?
No. So there will be points where we use natural ways of stopping, whether bollards or a tree perhaps in the middle, so cars are prevented, but it doesn't prevent pedestrians and cyclists. And I mean, because this is the landscape section, perhaps this is something that Nicola would like to come in and talk a little bit about more as well.
Nicola, could you just try and explain what the strategy is and how that helps to keep traffic, give pedestrians and cyclists more priority, I guess, is the approach.
Yeah, so we're very conscious that this is a development that occupies a piece of land currently full of forest plantation trees. So what we want to ensure is that we don't lose that really important character of the place. And so the idea behind the landscape design is that we really draw on those natural features like the plantation forest to bring in to the character of the development. So within the development area itself, there will be plenty of trees, both along the streets and in front gardens, but also in the amenity open spaces. And this sketch here is showing one of those areas where we are using the landscape to manage the traffic flow so that there isn't a through route through this area. So cars can come in at the south and loop round and back out again, but they don't go through, so that there isn't a physical vehicle connection between those arriving from the roundabout and those coming in or leaving onto South Road. So we're using the landscape to prevent that through flow of traffic. That's not to say that pedestrians and cyclists or scooters or any other active mode of transport can't travel through.
Obviously, e-scooters aren't yet legal, so
well, micro scooters then. For young children, the idea is that these landscape streets are very user friendly for pedestrians and cyclists and small scooters, and that they're really a place where people can come together and meet their neighbours and play a bit or sit and socialise. And so this sketch is showing how we envisage one of these places could be designed. So we're integrating the homes with this nice open space and the precedent images on the right hand side are showing ideas of what the landscape could really look like. The architecture in those pictures is not particularly or not necessarily relevant.
It's not very local.
They're about the images are showing the landscape. So green areas of pocket parks, areas with seating and play features and perhaps a pergola. So a lot of natural materials using timber and stone, things that are suitable for the local character of the forest. And the design shows how we've got here perhaps a bookended design with trees at either end, and then the more open lawn and play features more centrally with places for parents to sit and chat and watch the children play. So it's about being safe and being sociable, and also connecting through to the forest walk in the south and to the Sang in the north. Mm-hmm. So that's how we're using the landscape to really create a sense of place and to create appropriate movement.
That's really good, thank you, because that also answers a number of questions that we had sent through in advance via email. So we've got a few questions still to answer. I mean, one of the questions, I don't know if this is something that you can pick up on, Nicola. So if people are, pedestrians coming through these beautiful kind of green garden areas, these kind of garden streets almost, how will they get across to the Beaufort Park Sang? And as one person has put it quite bluntly, without being killed by the traffic.
Well, I hope they won't step out in front of any fast-moving traffic. That would be foolish. But we will have connecting routes to the Sang, and they would be at-grade crossings. We're not proposing any bridges or subways or anything to avoid the traffic. We hope that people will use their common sense and cross safely. But we are proposing direct routes that link through to Bucklers Park and to Great Holland Sang, so that we can form the super sang as Claire described earlier. So there'll be at grade crossings over the road.
Thank you. That helps answer that, I hope. Yes, I mean, it's maybe one day we can look forward to slightly less traffic as people have fewer reasons to commute or whatever. So I'm just looking to see if there's any questions that we've not
I don't know, did Chris want to say something?
Yeah, sorry, I should clarify. I mean, Nicola, puts it really well. There are at-grade crossings over 9 Mile Ride. There are also signalised crossings as well, so the traffic will be stopped. There's an existing one near to the roundabout, and there's also a new one going in as part of the Bucklers Park development. So they will be safe, and it will be a pretty convenient way to cross 9 Mile Ride.
And can I just ask, what does at-grade crossing mean?
Without a bridge, without going under the road.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
It'd just be a way to help you get over.
I was thinking I could. I didn't know what that meant. So no, thanks for that. And I think going back to some of the things that Nicola has made reference to, and Claire in particular. So the changes that we're proposing, what's that going to do to biodiversity? I think that's a Claire question. Is it perhaps?
Yeah, probably is for me. So as I described on the Sang slide, obviously we've got quite a large area apart from the Sang that will be safeguarded for biodiversity, and we're working with Nicola and Wayland to make sure that the site is permeable for biodiversity, that we've got these green streets and things going through. And of course then there's the wider sort of retained forestry plantation that will be managed as part of the scheme as well. So there are good buffers provided around the site. We will be the management of those areas will seek to result in improvements to those habitat types. So particularly the heathland, sort of regeneration of that heathland, which is suffering at the moment from being encroached by a lot of cell-set pine from the plantation. And we've been doing some quite detailed studies in regards to protected or notable species. So breeding bird surveys, bat activity surveys, reptile surveys, so that we've got a good idea, good baseline information to inform mitigation measures. And there will be specific mitigation measures set out in a strategy for the planning. So, how is the scheme going to be permeable for wildlife? Where we do need to relocate wildlife, how are we going to do that? Will there be any licensing requirements, for any closure of badger sets within the woodland, or any bat roosts that we might lose in trees to be removed? So that it's something that we're looking really closely at, and trying to focus on retaining and enhancing sort of key habitats.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it sounds quite complicated, to be honest, but hopefully we can create some briefing notes that we can share with people to give them a kind of sense as to all the different steps involved to make sure that wildlife is protected.
Yeah, I mean, as part of any impact assessment, we would look at, construction phase impact avoidance measures as well as operational phase. So, that is, an integral part of the impact assessment for planning.
And does that, sort of looking forward post completion, as it were, assuming we get to that, would that include things like kind of safe corridors and stuff for animals moving from one area to another?
It's all part of the, design. Mitigation by design is always, better than a retrofit. So that's how we've approached, working with the design team on this.
Okay, that makes sense. And who would manage all of this once we've finished the construction phase?
Well, we've sort of touched on that earlier in terms of the SANG and the sort of safeguarded area. We're in discussions with the council as to whether they would take it on as part of their ranger service to manage that with contributions from Southern Housing. And then there would be a separate management plan I would envisage for the actual development zone, you know, in the landscaping there, which, you know, Southern Housing would appoint a contractor to undertake that.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And then you know, we've been talking about the wildlife, and then for some people, a species fairly similar to wildlife, children. Whereabouts are the children going to be playing? You know, how can we make sure that they are able to play safely, but also, you know, will that be in areas where they're likely to disturb others?
So I can help with this question.
Yes, Nicola, please.
They won't be rounded up and forced to play in child-only zones. We're hoping that we can generate really fun and interesting play areas across the development in a number of different locations. We are guided by the local authority planning requirements. So there's a policy which sets out how much play we need to provide on a new development according to the number of people and families that will live here. So we look at those figures, and then we calculate the sort of area measure, if you like, the quantity of play space that we need to provide in order to meet the council's standards. And those standards are also divided into different types of play for different age groups. So we'll be providing a variety of play areas. Some will be equipped playgrounds. So this sketch here, for example, is just showing an illustration of how we might create a play area on the edge of the forest. The play for sort of 5 to 11-year-olds, where the cursor is now, would be in a public amenity space, and it would have equipment. And then for perhaps older children, we're thinking of trying to create more adventurous play within the retained trees in the plantation forest a little bit further south, so a little bit further from the homes, but utilising some of the natural landscape to create some really fun and adventurous play. So that's one area. And then throughout the development, there will be small areas of what we call doorstep play, which is sort of little play features for younger children that are very carefully supervised and overlooked by family homes, so that, you know, parents can feel confident that the children are safe and on a very close proximity to the homes. Mm-hmm. And in the East Commons area, so the larger park to the east, there'd be bits of play equipment there as well for younger children. So we're sort of distributing the play so that it's not too far from any one family. And we're also fortunate to be in close proximity to Great Holland Recreation Ground, where obviously there's open playing fields. There's an equipped play area there and some tennis courts. So lots of really nice provision nearby. And in order to facilitate that for this development, then the developer is expected to make a financial contribution towards that and towards the upkeep of that. So it's a kind of a range of provision, I guess, is the way to describe it, for a range of children.
Mm-hmm. No, that was, and I mean, I noticed that you suggesting that some of the play areas could be designed using timber. Would that be reclaimed, recycled from the plantation?
Yes, absolutely. So there's obviously a considerable amount of plantation forest to fell in order to make the space for the new homes, and in order to utilize that in the best way and the most sustainable way possible, we would use some of that timber not only for play equipment, but also for habitat creation. So we can use some for log piles, for building hibernaculum. So for various species, we can create features which are valuable to them for homes, for foraging, for food source, and yeah, for the children's play. So, and also for furniture, maybe some artistic installations. But yes, the timber will be partly used on site, so that there's no point.
It sounds like another question that we can ask for suggestions from the wider community.
Absolutely, yeah, we're very open to suggestions.
Yeah,
local ideas would be greatly appreciated.
Are there any? I mean, so we've had a query about, if we're putting play areas into what we were referring to as a buffer, does that diminish the value of the buffer in any way?
No, I don't think it does. There is a big move at the moment to make green infrastructure, which is the term that we refer to a variety of types of landscape, and to make that green infrastructure really multifunctional. And as part of the sustainability strategy for the site, it's important that we make the areas as multifunctional as possible. And by introducing play into the forest area, we're not reducing its function in terms of visibility or separation. So the tree cover still stays there, and you still get the sort of 50-meter depth of tree planting along 9 Mile Ride. So that still acts as that separation, if you like, and it keeps that the visual barrier between the road and the new homes.
And I guess some of the if the timbers do rot at all, then that just adds substrate for insects and beetles and wood-boring creatures, fungi, and other flora and fauna.
Yes, yeah.
It's oh, to be a child. Thank you very much, Nicola. That's really useful. I don't know if anybody else wants to jump in and talk about biodiversity or anything. I'm thinking that we're aiming for a net gain overall. Is that right?
Oh, Claire, do you want to take that one?
In terms of biodiversity, we'll be submitting a biodiversity net gain assessment as part of the planning application, which we've been discussing. Which metric? There's a new metric for calculating biodiversity net gain in terms of habitat losses, gains, and enhancements. So we've been discussing that with the council, and once we have a fixed master plan and we know all the details of what landscaping will be provided, we'll be finalising that.
And I think, and I can see that Carol's very concerned that any kind of felling is going to be detrimental, and I think it's worth going back. We don't have to jump back to the original slide, but this is a commercial timber plantation that is at the heart of our site, and so without kind of rehearsing all of the rationale, it has been infected, if you like, with foreign invasive rhododendron, which lots of people like the look of, but it's not exactly enhancing biodiversity. And I think, Claire, you were saying earlier that in terms of planting additional trees, that would actually bring back a more kind of local, sort of domestic mix of tree species. Is that right? Have I understood that properly?
Native.
Yes. So the loss of the plantation woodland, will have an impact. It's not completely neutral, but the value of the commercial plantation woodland versus any native broadleaf woodland that we could create through replacement planting is much lower. So and that's borne out in the biodiversity metric that we'll submit with the application. As Nicola described earlier, there's apart from the area of the footprint of development where we'll be removing trees, there will also be a buffer to development and along the gas pipe greenway, where we'll have to do some extra tree removal to prevent any potential risk of trees falling on new development, and in those areas and that's really to do with potential for wind throw of trees that are exposed that were originally in the middle of the plantation that aren't used to those environmental conditions, So we provide an extra buffer to those trees, and then we can do some replacement planting within those buffer zones, and that can be of more native, locally appropriate species that should have greater benefits for biodiversity. So it's a bit of a trade and balance there, really.
Understood. Yeah, I mean, it's a complex balancing act by the sound of it, with no simple. There's no one size fits all in terms of answers, but it's minimizing harm and maximizing benefit.
That's the idea. The idea is to, retain the habitats of highest biodiversity importance and trying to, restore and enhance those. And then where we are losing lower quality habitats, to try and replace that with, more locally appropriate, planting that's going to be benefit to wildlife.
I'm thinking we've got some biodiversity going on screen here.
Yeah, sorry, that'll be one time in my living room.
Can we go on to the next screen, please, Will? So we've talked about this, and I think we've gone through and looked at the fencing and so on, which separates an element of the safeguarded land from Badger Wood Park. We've had a question which I know James and I spoke about earlier on, to do with the timing of the felling, which rather neatly brings us through to a question like timing, timetable, phasing, and I'm wondering whether we've got a chance just to very quickly talk about what sort of time periods are we talking about, and if possible, are we able to have a sense of when any commercial timber would be harvested? So I think, is that Seth or James?
Do you want me to start off with the planning timescales, because that might be the useful part.
Brilliant.
And then James and Seth
Jamie,
can follow up. So at the moment, we're in discussions with the council in terms of evolving our design on until we're in a position to submit the application. Now, we're expecting that we'll get that application submitted by the end of September. There'll then be the ability to comment formally directly to the local authority based on those plans, which will be further evolved and have more detail than what you see in front of you today. We then expect to go to planning committee for a decision. That would normally take at least 13 weeks from that submission in September. So it's pretty unlikely that there would be a planning committee in December, given the Christmas break. So we'd probably be looking at January time. And should the application be approved or recommended for approval by members, it would then be a case of tying up some odds and ends with the legal agreement, and then a decision is issued. From there, you're looking at 12 to potentially 18 months to get your conditions cleared. So it wouldn't be until 2023, I would expect, before construction is ready to start on the site. James, Seth, I don't know if you want to pick up from timescales from there.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Jamie. I don't know, Seth, if you can pick up the programme for the construction.
Yeah, so I think in terms of sort of construction programme, the real start on site will probably be 2023, early 2023, mainly as a function of those sort of planning timescales that Jamie's talked about. Understandably, one of the first things that will be required as part of an enabling works package is going to be the tree clearance. But that's the sort of rough starting point for the construction program, is sort of Q1 2023.
Mm-hmm. So, and I suppose people will be keen to understand what can be done to help sort of minimise the impact on wildlife, and in particular the nesting season. It's an issue that comes up for people like Network Rail every year, about when's the best time to fell timber?
Sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to say, Seth, that would obviously be done outside of the bird nesting season, so we would avoid that. There would also most likely be an ecologist on site to make sure that any trees or lower sort of understory shrubby type bushes are checked before they're removed, to make sure that there isn't any harm or damage to wildlife or to their nests or
No, thank you.
Yeah,
I think that was the reassurance
their
that
habitat.
we're hoping for.
Yeah, just to add to that, you know, it would likely be a planning, you know, conditioned by planning, that there would be, you know, a wildlife management plan for, you know, the construction phase of development, and that would address nesting birds, any issues with, you know, any other protected species, any requirements for, you know, licensing from Natural England to facilitate that. So that would be sort of a further stage to be secured as part of planning.
I know that there was, you know, there've been some concern about bats, and you know, and they're protected, obviously.
Yeah. So yeah, bats and their roosts are protected by the habitats regulations. If we were in the position where any trees were to be removed, where we'd identified bat roosts, and we're, you know, undertaking a lot of baseline studies for that at the moment, and that would be updated, I'm envisaging, before felling actually occurred, because of the you know, the intervening time period there between now and when site start might happen. You know, if there were any roosts that were identified, we would have to identify mitigation for that. The works would have to be timed suitably to avoid a period when the bats were most likely to be present, you know, and the works would have to be covered by a license from Natural England. So what I would say to anyone who's concerned about that is that, you know, there's absolutely no way that that can't be addressed, you know, as part of what's secured as part of the planning or any future licensing. Also to add, in the plantation woodland, there are not a significant amount of trees that offer good roosting opportunities for bats, just because of the nature of the trees, the Scots pine that are there. So to date, we have not identified a lot of bat roosts, although, you know, bats are clearly, you know, active across the area.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm very conscious that we're rapidly reaching the end of the session. Just a reminder for the people that are still with us, that this is the beginning of our conversation. We're very much looking forward to hearing a lot more, you know, more questions, more suggestions, and we'll be posting information up both on our Facebook page and on our website, where we expect to have some, you know, useful and constructive discussion. So we're coming to the last few questions, because, as I said, we are going to be reaching the end in a few minutes. But so going back to the Taylor Wimpey situation, are we at all dependent on their timelines for any of our programme?
I'll just pick this one up slightly. So as I think Jamie sort of spoke to earlier, whilst these sites are adjacent to, well, sort of neighbour one another, they are sort of going forward separately. So there isn't that interdependency there, aside from just the practicalities of them being next door. But from a planning perspective and a construction perspective, they're not going to be linked.
And I know that Jeremy's, so not our Jeremy, but Jeremy in the audience, he's asked how we try and reduce, if Taylor Wimpey with their 68 homes, and then the number of homes that we've got to the east of our site, all using South Road, is that going to put what's the burden, I guess, is the question, and is there in any way that we can try and kind of mitigate the impact of that combined impact? So it's a hard one for us to answer on our own, I guess.
I mean, again, I'll sort of pick that up and then sort of defer to some of the members of the team. But this is something that's this is coming through loud and clear in this session as well, is that to be very deliberate about how we strategize our sort of road and vehicular connectivity strategy for the site to minimize the amount of cars from our scheme that will be going on to South Road. One of the ways that we're doing that is sort of a number of sort of deliberate interventions to the roads that I think some of my colleagues and team members have already mentioned before, but perhaps sort of Wylan or Chris, you could touch on that.
Just before people join, there's another thing that's linked, because it's touched on the West Road as well, which is, I understand that South Road is actually is not adopted as a private road, and so there are maintenance cost issues. And if we're creating traffic that's going to be using that road, does that have any implications in terms of maintenance costs and who picks that up? Is that something that we can answer as well?
Well, I can talk about that. There is stopping up on the South Road access to Beaufort Park. So there isn't a rat run. You can't go from one end to the other to the roundabout. So that will hopefully prevent it happening on that level. On the private nature of the road, I think that's probably something Chris, as our transport consultant, can pick up on. And definitely he's picked that up with the highways over this last year that we've been dealing with the site. So that's something, Chris. Is Chris there?
I am. Sorry,
yeah, hi.
Yeah, so we're on South Road now, yeah? Okay.
Yeah. So it's the adoption, effectively.
Yeah, it's the second one. It's a private road, but it's owned by the council, and it's one of many things that we've been discussing very closely with them and continue to. The principle, it is fine. There's just some legal points we've got to work through, and whether you end up adopting it. Again, we're still going through that process with the council. In terms of physically how it is, it's wide enough. We could put a new junction on there, and in fact, the council would probably prefer we did that anyway. So we're just going through that process with them at the moment.
Thank you. That's really useful. So, and I think one of the things that we've not, we touched on it very briefly at the beginning, but I mean, this is to a large extent a kind of brownfield site. Is that not right? When we say green space, but so that we had a question, so is it the local authorities relying on brownfield sites to meet its housing need? Somebody's asked a question about brownfield sites.
Yeah, shall I pick that one up?
Yeah.
So as I said at the start, the local authority has to decide in its local plan, how does it meet that need for 10,000 homes over 12, 13 years. It simply, my understanding, it simply does not have sufficient capacity to deliver that solely on brownfield land, and thus needs to identify the most sustainable and suitable sites on the edge of Bracknell, of which this is one. And I'd add as well, I think there's a second reason why you would do that as well, is that if you focus all of your housing sites in central locations in Bracknell town centre, all you're going to see delivered is flatted development, and we know at the moment there's a big demand for more houses. But a district like Bracknell needs a really wide variety of different forms of homes for the people of Bracknell Forest, and this scheme will deliver the vast majority of actual houses with gardens. So there's a real benefit in terms of having that variety of different sites.
No, that makes sense, and I think someone's pointed out that there's no getting away from that. We are building in what is currently a green gap, but the site is obviously in the local plan, draft local plan, and it's allocated for the reasons that you've explained in terms of meeting need. in the wider area. So I don't think we're shy of that. It's just, but I think the key issue is, and hopefully it's helped. This evening's helped at least get the conversation going, because we are trying really hard to make sure that this development, is really something that contributes to the Bracknell way of life, and as a benefit. We're getting very close to the end now, so I know that there's a few questions that we've not specifically. So just rattle through, and then anybody who wants to jump in. So buses, will we have buses going through the estate?
I don't think we will. Spencer's a short answer to that. Get close to 9 mile ride. Don't need to.
And so that does link through to, will there be cycle routes linking to the schools in Great Holland?
Yes, there will. Yeah, there's actually improvements being done on.
That's it. We're going to rattle through now. So going back to the question about facilities for potential residents, what's our plan in terms of putting amenities such as shops, doctor's surgery, veterinary surgeries or whatever in our development?
So do you want me to pick that one up
Yep.
in terms of infrastructure more widely? So there's 2 points here, and there's a lot of money being poured in to the wider area in terms of contributions to fund infrastructure. The first way is something called Community Infrastructure Levy, and that goes to those wider kind of strategic projects like expanding new schools, additional public transport. So when the local authority is identifying those 10,000 homes, what infrastructure does it need to go alongside it? We'll be paying £192 for every additional square metre of private housing that we deliver. So you can imagine with 226 homes, we are talking about figures in the millions there in terms of the amount of contributions to wider infrastructure. And then all of these points we've talked about, different junctions today that are identified that might need some more improvement. We'll be making site-specific contributions towards those through a legal agreement with the council as well. Thank you.
Yeah. A slightly technical question, which might be one for Claire. Does the SANG impact on the designation of the area as a local wildlife site? It is currently listed as a PLWS, awaiting survey on the TVRC live list.
Yes, so the SANG area is listed as a potential local wildlife site, pending further assessment. I don't know when that assessment would happen. That seems to have sort of stalled. It was identified quite a while ago, but no, it shouldn't impact on that designation in the future. If the Wildlife Sites Board want to take that forward, the public access across that shouldn't prevent that. And of course, there's large areas of that land to the north that will be safeguarded anyway for biodiversity. So I can't see there being an interaction there in terms of this planning application.
Brilliant, thank you. You have the privilege of having answered the last question. Thank you very much, Claire. It's been a roller coaster evening. Thank you very much to the panel. We are bang on time, so I'm going to just, as is customary, say thank you, Nicola, Claire, Wylan, James, Chris, Jamie, Seth, Jeremy. If I've missed anyone, I'm apologising. Thank you to Will, Georgia, Joseph, Marion, and Celia for helping keep me on my toes. But most importantly, thank you very much to all of you who are still with us. Carol, Cindy, Jane, Janet, Joe, and Steve, and to all of those who've had to go off and have your supper. I envy you. We will be putting everything up on our project website. You should all have the details for it. There is a very lively Facebook page, and we'll be sending out links through to everything that we've said this evening, and making sure that the questions that were answered, as well as any other questions that come in and we haven't had a chance to answer will be all covered over the coming days, and we look forward to seeing you hopefully face to face in September, and we've already approached the pavilion on the recreation ground to secure some space for Saturday morning, early September. So look forward to seeing you then. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great evening.